Being a new mom is hard. We get it.
It's easy to feel alone, but we know that's never how God intended it. So we want to welcome you to the Motherhood.
If you need professional parenting advice, clinically proven data, or study-based evidence, please let us know where to find it. Because here at the Motherhood, we focus on sharing experiences, offering encouragement and understanding, but most importantly, friendship.
We're here to do motherhood together. Hello guys, and welcome back to the Motherhood. If you're new here, my name is Riley.
And I'm Bethany.
And we are talking all about our birth stories. We are kind of doing this a little bit differently than most of our episodes. Instead of one episode, we are going to hit you with all three in separate episodes, but posted on the same day. So if you are starting here with Archer's birth story, make sure you check out Indy and Ayla's, because even though we are two people, all three births were vastly different. And I'm super excited about that specifically because Bethany, you are the same person, so you've experienced two totally different situations.
Very different.
And yet similar in some ways.
Yeah.
But, so make sure you check out all three, and without further ado, let's just hop into Mr. Archer's birth story.
Yeah, I feel like I'm, so excited to, just revisit it, because it's been, almost 2.5 years for him, so.
And I feel like I was going to say, the girls are still fun to talk about, because they're one,
fairly recent.
It's like memory lane for you with Archer.
Yeah, and I'm oh, yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of my story starts during pregnancy. So I had a fairly, I guess I could say, normal pregnancy up until about, I believe it was 37 weeks. So when I went in, or I guess it was my 36-week appointment, but when I went in for that appointment, they noticed that my blood pressure was high, and that was the first time it had read high during my pregnancy.
But that's not, super uncommon, right?
I don't think so. But I know it can be a sign of things, so I know they definitely look into it.
Right, but it's not like if you have high blood pressure, something is bound to happen.
Yes. And I think that's why and it's probably over, a certain number or level. I can't recall. I think maybe at that appointment it was 150 over something, which is just a little bit high. So when I went in for that appointment, they noticed it was high. They had me lay down on the bed during my appointment, and they checked it on my left arm or something. They basically tried to measure that a different way other than me just sitting in a chair.
It was like a fluke.
Exactly. So I think the second time they took it, it was more normal. So they weren't necessarily all that concerned. And then I think I went in then for my 37-week appointment, and it was high again. And so at that point, what they decided to do is get me into an ultrasound room to check my fluid levels and things like that. They did notice that my fluid was low. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were lower than they normally should be. So at that point, they kind of estimated or thought that I might have gestational hypertension, which I think is just a high blood pressure diagnosis within pregnancy. But they were we definitely want to keep an eye on that and monitor it. So they asked me to come in just a few days later to check on it again. And they kind of told me, hey, we just want to make sure your fluid stays above a certain amount. We want to keep an eye on your blood pressure and everything. At this point, I was kind of a little bit worried, because I was okay, there might be something wrong. And I guess just the thought of that, in a pregnancy, you're oh,
which is very scary too, because I know that you tried very hard to stay active and eat well and do everything right.
Yes.
So it's kind of it's not, but it's kind of a slap in the face to be
You're right, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because the pregnancy had been so kind of normal up into there, and like you said, I was trying to be active and kind of take care of myself. And I remember in both my pregnancies actually, but I tested positive for GBS too. But I remember even hearing that, I was wait, what? And it's a normal common thing that you can't really control, but just to hear that something was quote unquote wrong with my pregnancy, I remember crying at even just that. Anyways, but yes, it was kind of I thought I was taking good care of myself. Why is this a thing? Anyways, when I came back for another checkup, they had found that my levels had dropped. My fluid levels had dropped again. And so they did kind of like some fetal monitoring just to make sure that Archer was okay. His heartbeat and everything sounded really good. If I'm recalling correctly, they kind of sent me home, but asked me to come back for a third time, like more recent than a week, because they wanted to check on his growth to see if he had grown any, because they did take that ultrasound to look at my levels and everything too. So I think I came back just a few days later. Again, they're monitoring me closely at this point. I think I'm 38 weeks by now. But they saw that, again, my fluid levels had dropped, my blood pressure was still high, and they noticed that he hadn't grown any since my last checkup. So at this point, he's also not growing.
And I know from my experience, low fluid, a big risk is slow growth.
Yes. So kind of the two are connected. And so at this point, I'm talking with my OBGYN, and she tells me that I most likely, or that I do have pre-eclampsia, which is something I had never even heard of or like thought to research, didn't even really know it was a thing.
But see, I have heard of that, and I don't know, the way it was presented to me was very scary.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I had a dramatic experience hearing that, or if, like I don't know if that person that was talking to me, if it is as dramatic as they made it sound or not, but it can be like life-threatening, right?
I think it can be harmful to both the mother and the baby if like left untreated.
Right.
And I remember reading like for the mom, it can cause like possibly seizures, and again, it's stunting the baby's growth. I know there are some other things involved in that. I honestly didn't really look it up too much. I think part of me was just
that's
like scared
good.
too.
No, that's probably for the best.
I don't necessarily know a lot of what the outcome could have been if gone untreated, but obviously my doctor told me, no, this is something where we don't want you to continue in pregnancy.
Right. Well, you're 38 weeks.
Yes. And I mean, that's another praise in a sense, was that it did come on later in my pregnancy. Right. It wasn't until 37 weeks that my blood pressure started going up. And again, by 38, they were like, okay, I think we can't really wait any longer. And again, he was not growing. So at my 38-week appointment, they said, again, he looks healthy and sounded healthy, but he's not growing and my fluid was dropping. And I guess I should kind of preface, at this point, I was hoping to or planning to do an unmedicated birth, really only because I wanted, in some like weird way, I truly just wanted to experience birth, and to know what it felt like. My mom had 4 unmedicated births. She got 1 epidural, so I was like, my mom did it this way. I kind of, in a sense, like want to follow in her footsteps. I really just wanted to experience it, and I think I wanted like that, like kind of like hormone crazy bawling emotional moment where you like birth your child, and you lay it on your chest and it's just beautiful and messy and like,
I love that for you, but I very much wanted an epidural.
Yeah, I know,
I'll be honest, I mean, I ended up having a C-section, but like when I had a birth plan, I planned on checking in and being like, hi, I'm Riley White. Go ahead and send the anesthesiologist up. Want the epidural. Yes,
I know. And so, again, it was mostly just because I'm like, I just wanted to experience what it felt like.
But I'm making light of it. That's awesome.
I know.
That's super, super cool.
I know.
Wish I could do that, but that was just not.
And you and our friend group and everyone was like super supportive of it and everything. So just circling back to that to preface that, again, up to this point, I was hoping to have like a spontaneous, unmedicated birth. I had done a like natural birthing course online, and I was prepping for this. Really didn't look at any other options in the sense of like induction or C-section. Right. I think I watched like a few courses on the chance of if you need to go into a C-section, but was really just hoping to go spontaneous and unmedicated.
And can I cut you off right there for a second?
Sure.
Because I just feel like it's the perfect time to mention, like, it can be so hard to feel like your birth plan is ripped out from under you.
Yeah.
Because it's a very vulnerable experience, and I think a lot of women want that hormonal and like empowering, prideful feeling of like, we did it, we made it. And to have these plans and it not work out, like, I just want to say to everyone out there listening, like, it's okay to feel however you need to feel when these things happen.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think it's okay to mourn, like kind of like mourn the plan that you couldn't have, but also things can work out better than you thought.
Exactly.
And like, you know, cliche, and not to disregard your feelings, but I do think obviously God has a plan, and there is beauty in the messed up plans in a sense too.
Yep.
But so at my 38-week appointment, doctor tells me at this point they need to induce me because it's no longer safe or beneficial for Archer to be on the inside. So we're looking at induction at this point. And again, I'm kind of like, I don't even really know what that is. Like, what does that look like? Type of thing.
Because you hadn't prepared for it.
Yeah. And again, I think I knew about people being induced and everything, but I didn't really know what the process was.
Like, you weren't naive to it. It just wasn't part of your plan, so you didn't, like, hone in on that particular research.
Exactly. And so, strangely enough, though, at the same time, I did feel like I kind of like felt at peace. And so they scheduled me for an induction. I think it was like the next evening. So it was kind of nice in that I had time to come home. Mm-hmm. I knew when I was going to the hospital, I could kind of plan, I could prep, I could make sure my bag was like completely packed. It was already packed at this point, but like, you know, I could just have time to kind of rest at home, prepare.
Have a last meal, just you and Josh, get the dog taken care of.
Yes. So that part of it was really nice. I did love knowing. And, like, silly enough, I was even, like, thinking about, I was like, okay, so he's probably going to come on this day. So I was thinking about, like, his birthday. You know, I'm like, ooh, how do those numbers sound together and everything? Anyways, so we went back home. You know, I called Josh, called my parents, the family, kind of updated them all. Hey, going to be going into an induction tomorrow. They scheduled it for, like, 10 p.m. in the evening. And so...
Wait, sorry.
You good?
I know... For those of you who are not familiar with their personal lives, Bethany's parents are not local.
Yes.
But they live in different states. So, did your parents have time to come in?
Yeah, that was kind of another thing. My parents had already planned whenever and however, you know, I went into labor and had the baby, they were planning to come and stay with us for a week to help out.
That's kind of a blessing, too, with the induction, you know?
Yes. And they're about 8 hours away, so... I guess if it was spontaneous, it would still be a matter of, hey, going into the hospital, but it could be anywhere from, like, 5 hours to 24 to 36, you know.
But not to spoil your story, I don't want to share your business, but you had a really fast first labor, so it's probably for the best that it was induced, because I don't know if they would have made it.
Yeah. More on that later, though. But yeah, so I was able to say, hey, we're going in. Most likely, you know, we would have the baby the next day. Here's when you can plan to come down. Anyways, we go home, kind of take a moment to ourselves. I'm jumping all over the place. But at that 38-week appointment, my doctor did strip my membranes. I was like almost 2 centimeters dilated at that point, and like my cervix was pretty soft and was already starting to efface. So it was like good progress. It was good progress.
Does that hurt?
For me, it did not hurt. It was uncomfortable, but I compare it to like a pap smear.
That's like what I was going to say. Is like, how does it compare? Okay.
I would say it's maybe just like a little bit more invasive in pressure than a pap smear. I know for some people, they say it was like worse than labor. For me, I
bet it depends on where your body's at, though.
That's also very true. But my doctor knew that I was hoping to go unmedicated, so she said, I can try to strip your membranes. I was still scheduled for an induction, but she said, we can try to get this thing going in hopes that...
Props to that doctor. I love that.
Yes, she did try to kind of help me out there, and I was more than okay with them doing that. I just remembered, though, in that appointment, again, she at this point has already told me I'm getting induced, but she was like, do you want me to strip your membranes? And I just remember in that moment thinking, oh my gosh, like, wait, if she does this, like, I could literally possibly go into labor, but also I'm about to have a baby anyways. But, like, I, like, hesitated. I was like, and she was like, I know you want this. I'm going to do it. And she did it. And in that circumstance, I was more than okay with it. Again, I was just, like, had a freak out moment of, like, holy crap, I'm about to have a baby, and this could start the process. It's just
your mind is literally blown, and you can't think straight,
Yes, exactly. So she did do that. We went home. I was kind of, like, bouncing on the birth ball and everything while we were waiting to go to the hospital again, still just kind of trying to start things naturally for myself, if possible. At 10 o'clock, we head to the hospital. And now I swear I was starting to have some small contractions. Like when we were waiting to like check in and everything, Again, I, at this point, didn't really know what a contraction felt like, but I do remember feeling like some tightening, and I was just kind of like walking around like, okay, I noticed something, like it was noticeable. And I remember even like looking at my watch, and like they were fairly consistent.
And now that you've had Ayla, you can probably look back
I look
on
back
that
and I
with
was
more...
like, I truly did think that the stripping of my membranes did start something. And so I kind of think that, again, while we were waiting to check in, I think something was starting to happen. And so by the time we actually get checked in and into the room, it was probably like 11 o'clock. And at this point, they are already getting me ready for like an IV and everything. I've changed into my hospital gown. My husband was getting ready to like, he had set up my diffuser with my essential oils and stuff I had planned, was getting my playlist ready, all of the things, was like trying to get comfortable. They're trying to get my IV in and at the same time take my blood pressure. And one of the nurses was like, okay, hold off on the IV real quick because like your blood pressure is like really high, and I just don't know if it's because, you know, they're trying to poke you and prod you.
A lot's
and all
going
this stuff.
on.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think up until this point, my blood pressure had maybe been like 160 over something. And so then they're like, your blood pressure is like 180 over something. So literally in the matter of like a day, it had gone from like 160 to 180, which I think is also like stroke level or something crazy. And all this to say, I did not feel any different. I had no other symptoms of preeclampsia other than the high blood pressure. You can have like headaches, swelling, dizziness, seeing spots. I had nothing.
Which is kind of scary.
Yes. But at the same time,
you had no idea.
Yeah. Other than the high blood pressure, I felt no different, even when I was like in that hospital with 180 over something blood pressure.
And you can't feel blood pressure. So like,
yeah.
The one symptom you have no way of knowing you're experiencing without the doctor checking it.
Exactly. And so to make things even a little bit more crazier, at that point, they're like, hey, here's what's going to happen. We're going to have to put you on magnesium for labor, I guess because my blood pressure was that high. Mm-hmm. And at this point, it's severe preeclampsia. They said, you're going to be put on magnesium. You're not going to be able to get out of your hospital bed. You're going to have to be hooked up onto it, like even after the baby's born. You basically just have to like sit in your hospital bed and labor. We're going to have to monitor you more highly. And they said, oh, and by the way, you have to move to a different hospital. Because little did we know, at this hospital, they could only like see patients with a blood pressure up to 160. And since I was now considered high risk, I had to go to a different hospital downtown where they could monitor me more. And so just a quick suggestion to you moms out there, if your blood pressure does start going up, or even if you like have the chance of a high risk pregnancy, check with the hospitals and see which ones can see you at whatever levels you are, because if we had, nobody mentioned that to us, and if we had known that if there was a chance we were high risk, we would have gone to that hospital in the first place.
And those are things that you don't know.
Exactly. You know? I didn't even think to look at like which hospital we should go if it was high risk. And our doctor didn't really say anything about it because, again, I don't think she was like expecting me to shoot up to 180, but just a little nugget of information there. So they were also like, hey, we're going to get you hooked up and you're going to have to ride an ambulance to the hospital while you're already hooked up to IV, magnesium, all of these things. And weirdly enough, I just, even in that moment, still remember being like, okay, this is not what I wanted, but I just remember feeling so much peace. Mm-hmm. And I credit that to just like prayers and what, you know, people were praying over us. We let my parents know and everything, hey, we're going to have to end up getting transferred. And I was like, yay, I get to ride in an ambulance. I've never ridden in one of those before. I was joking with the people, kind of just like, oh, like, do I get to have sirens? Like, is it like official, whatever?
Are they gonna speed to the hospital?
Yeah. So they get me prepped, and I should also mention, that at this point they have also started me on Pitocin. So I guess since I was already kind of starting to dilate and everything, they just went straight to Pitocin as soon as I checked into the hospital. So I'm on Pitocin, magnesium, all the things getting loaded up into the ambulance. By the time, and this is, in my mind, it's only probably been an hour since we got into the room and like they started the Pitocin. So this has to be like 12:30 that I'm getting loaded into the ambulance. And by the time I am in the ambulance, the contractions are starting. And I just remember being like strapped to this stretcher and the contractions were intense enough that like I had to like close my eyes, and like all I could do was like curl my toes because like I couldn't move. I'm like,
which is not part of your plan.
No.
You wanted to move, and
I wanted to be able to walk around, do different positions,
not
all of
literally
these
be
things.
strapped to a bed.
Yes, and on magnesium where I can't even get out of my bed. So as you can see, my plan is already starting to crumble.
But I have to interrupt you right there because I am dying to know, and I don't think I ever will. What does a contraction feel like? Is it like an intense period cramp? Is it a pain unlike anything that you have experienced before?
Yeah, it's honestly so hard to like explain. I feel like most people say, and probably the closest thing is like a period cramp, but it's like almost like your muscles are tightening too, and like squeezing and cramping all at the same time. So it's almost like a flex and a cramp and a pressure, and
I just really want to experience.
Yeah.
Like, not
you do
not
and you
a
don't,
lot,
right?
Not
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
I want to feel one for about 20 seconds,
just
and
to
then
know. Yeah. So yeah, I'm strapped to the stretcher. They're asking me a few questions, and while they're asking me questions, again, the contractions are pretty frequent. Like I had a few in the span of probably like a 20-25 minute ambulance ride to the next hospital. But I just remember having to close my eyes and like trying to breathe, trying to relax my face and stuff. But at this point, I am already thinking, how am I going to do this? There's no way I'm going unmedicated. And some people say with Pitocin or inductions, the contractions are even more intense than if they were like natural.
I can see that because it's forcing your body to do things.
Yeah. So in my mind, I'm like, it was probably more intense than an actual like regular contraction, which I do believe it was because I experienced regular contractions in my second birth. Anyways, but so they're already starting. I'm already starting to think and doubt myself. And so we get to the hospital. As I'm being wheeled through the room, again, I can just remember these contractions are probably already 3 to 4 minutes apart. Mm-hmm. We get into the hospital room. My husband had a ride in our car separately. He joins me. It felt like hours, but once I got there, they did check me, and they said I was only 3 centimeters. And at that point, I was like, okay, I think I want the epidural.
I have to go to 10, and this is a 3?
Yes, exactly. And again, I'm like, I can't get up out of my bed, so I literally just have to sit here. So it felt like a while for them to get the anesthesiologist in there. And I just remember like curling over, hugging a pillow while they're trying to get the epidural in my back. There's multiple doctors and nurses and whatever in the room. And I remember while they were trying to give me the epidural, I was feeling pressure and like almost like I wanted to like push or like, pardon my language, like poop. It was like that kind of like my language, like sorry. Anyways, but it was like that kind of pressure while they're trying to get this epidural in me. It takes a while to get in. I start to feel some relief. I'm like laying down. I remember also once we got to the hospital, I remember feeling my water break. And it was almost literally like a water balloon popped inside of me. Like it was like I could like hear and feel like a pop, and then I felt leaking. I was like, nurse, I think my water just broke. And she's like, no, like sometimes you might just experience like some like pee or whatever. And she checked and she's like, oh no, it did break. Don't
you hate that though? Like they assume because it's your first time you don't know what you're talking about.
And I knew it wasn't. I was like, this is something. And my hours in time are a little bit off, but I just remember like feeling the sensation to push while they're giving me the epidural. Once they finish, they check me again, and the nurse checks, and then she says, I might need somebody else to come over here and look at this. And I'm like, what? Another nurse comes and checks me, and they're like, you're at 10 centimeters. So,
and okay, wait, what's your guesstimation from epidural to now?
In my mind, I'm like, maybe at most an hour and a half, if even.
Wow.
I'm like, there's no way that it could be that long. So I think once my water broke, again, somehow I went from like a 3 to a 10 in the span of maybe at most 2 hours, but I think it had to be like an hour or so. She was even like, I got to get someone else to look at this because you were just at a 3. How are you at a 10? And so I get the epidural. I'm laying down. I'm still feeling a little bit, I think, more pressure than I should because my doctor comes in. At this point, they're waiting for the doctor to get there because she was like on call, and they're like, wow, you're ready to push, but we're just waiting for the doctor to get here.
Typically, when you're at a 3, you have a lot longer to go.
Yes, exactly. And But the doctor gets there and she's like, I can tell you're still kind of like struggling through these contractions. Like, are you still feeling them? And I was like, yeah. So they up my epidural just a little bit more. And at that point, I'm like comfortable. I'm not feeling a thing. Just like, I can barely even feel the contraction. I don't know when one's happening other than on looking on the screen or whatever. I'm super comfortable. I feel like I can finally like open my eyes and look at my husband and look at the doctor and look around, because before then I just like had to shut my eyes and like be inside myself.
Right.
But then I'm like cracking jokes again. I'm feeling so good. Anyways, they're like, you're ready to push. I pushed for about 40 minutes. With the help of the doctor, and he was born, I think, like it was like 4:08 in the morning. So my labor was literally from like 11 to 4.
That
so
is insane. And first baby.
Yeah, it was 5 hours with the induction and everything. And when he got out, he was perfectly healthy. He was 5 pounds 1 ounce, so he was a little tiny, again because of the pre-eclampsia. I had to stay on the magnesium and just be monitored a little bit more. But truly, like looking back, when I'm just so thankful he was healthy, I was healthy. It took a while for my blood pressure to get kind of back to normal before we could go home. But I look back, and even though I wanted to go unmedicated, I think for that experience, again, a lot of that was hard because I wasn't able to get up and move around like I had planned and do all of the things. I had to get transported in an ambulance, and right when we got there, things were just so crazy getting set up. There wasn't even any time to like try to set up my diffuser again or do any of the things. It was just like so
literally
chaotic.
Nothing you had planned.
Yeah, but again, I just felt so much peace during that, like peace again to the point where I was kind of able to make light about it. Like I wasn't like that upset. And I wasn't like, I thought I would kind of in a sense be like disappointed in myself for not having made it unmedicated. But it truly, that epidural allowed me to be so present once he was born. And for that experience, I think I was so glad that I was able to like be present and like be positive and making jokes while I'm pushing, and like just like pushed him out, didn't even feel a thing hardly, and got to see him. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily that hormonal, messy, glorious type of birth in a sense and moment that I expected, but I was present and I was comfortable and was still just like so happy and so proud of myself.
It's beautiful in its own way.
Yes. And looking back now, I'm also like, not that it matters, but I truly think while I was getting that epidural, I was like in transition. So I was probably like 7 centimeters and very close to like getting ready to push. So I'm like, I think I was almost there, but I wouldn't have known. And regardless, even if I was and had known that, it truly ended up being, for as crazy and chaotic as it was, it truly ended up being what I needed for that birth and for that time. So although it was unexpected and unplanned, it turned out to be exactly what I think I didn't know I needed. Right. And being able to be comfortable and have that epidural, I think, helped my blood pressure as well because I was relaxed and comfortable and everything. So unplanned, medicated birth, high risk, but still in the end, praise the Lord, we were healthy, and I truly rate it like a positive experience all in all.
I feel like it's funny because I feel like you hear so many like unintentional natural births where like people don't get to the hospital fast enough, or for whatever reason they can't get an epidural or whatever. You had an accidentally medicated birth.
Accidentally, yeah.
And I'm so glad that you got to have that, not anyway like what you planned, but still a beautiful, positive experience. I do have one question. You mentioned earlier that you tested positive for group B strep.
Yes.
Was there anything special that had to happen at the birth because of that, or was it like, why do they even test for that? You know? Like,
yeah. It's just like a bacteria that you have that I think like it's weird because you can have it for some pregnancies, but not with others. It's like super common, but I guess it's just a bacteria that when the baby passes through the canal, the baby can get it. So they have to monitor you for 24 hours after you give birth. Monitor
so
you and the baby. Yeah.
That it affects, not
and
before.
And for most, I know some hospitals treat it like as soon as some hospitals test for it very early on, and then I think can give you medication during your pregnancy. My case, they said if you're at home and your water breaks, you have to go into the hospital right away because your water's broken, and I guess
That's
because
the
of
barrier.
bacteria. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So they're like, we need to get you on the medicine right away. Okay. So obviously I was there and induced when that happened. But afterwards, they have to monitor you for 24 hours before you can go home.
I was just curious how that affected.
Yeah. So Group B, strep positive, and severe preeclampsia. Just adding to my repertoire.
Your resume.
Yes. And I will also be sharing Ayla's birth story, which is fairly different than my experience with Archer.
It's very different.
So you can check that out as well as Riley's planned C-section birth. So again, just a very different experience, but we're sharing it all, so make sure you check out all of the episodes.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing all that. I feel like it's going to be really helpful and comforting to a lot of people out there. So thanks for being vulnerable and sharing with us. And everyone listening, just make sure you check out the rest of the birth stories, and we will see you in the next one.
See ya.
Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to listen to us, friend. If you felt encouraged by what you heard, please consider giving us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Unless you hated it, because like your mom always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't say anything at all.
And to officially join the Motherhood, follow us on Instagram at themotherhood_moms. We always have ways to interact, and we want to hear from you. Have a great week.